Proving itself over the jungles of Vietnam, the A-6 Intruder quickly becomes the backbone of naval air attack. Fighting day or night in all-weather conditions, the A-6's durability is unmatched. 25 years later, it will wreak havoc over the sands of Iraq. Over 60 years ago, one of the greatest airplanes ever deployed from an American aircraft carrier emerged, the A-6 Intruder. The primary mission is day CQ and the secondary mission is day flight time. This is Attack Squadron VA-34. V stands for Fixed Wing, A for Attack. The men are being briefed one level below the flight deck where a flurry of activity is already underway. The planes are given final preparations as the rescue helicopter is launched. All day it will hover next to the ship waiting for a disaster that will never come, leaving all hope behind. For the naval aviator, nothing is ever routine. If the pilot gets a cold cat shot, he will have less than a second to decide whether to attempt to power out of his predicament or to leave his multimillion-dollar aircraft behind in a life-saving ejection. Upon landing, he must guide his aircraft on a precise descent to safety. Too high, and he will be forced to plunge downward at the last moment, most likely snapping his landing gear. Too low, and he will hit the back end of the ship. Too far to the right, and he hits the control tower. Too far to the left, and $100 million worth of aircraft will go up in flames. Like all naval aviators, the men of Attack Squadron 34 face this challenge twice a day. But because they fly the all-weather A6 Intruder, they are expected to carry out their mission even when massive waves come crashing over the 60-foot bow. Whether the sun is shining or the seas are storming, the Intruder's mission goes on. All-weather and night attack is the mission of the A6 and has been for 30 years. In conditions that keep most airplanes grounded, the A6 is in its element. The Naval Air Station at Oceana near Virginia Beach is the home of the Navy's attack wing for the eastern United States. In February 1963, the training squadron VA-42 became the first Navy squadron to receive intruders. At the time, the plane brandished state-of-the-art electronics representing the future of naval air warfare. However, that was a long time ago. Now the US Navy's enduring workhorse has been retired for nearly 30 years. The fact that the Intruder has lasted as long as it has is a surprise even to those who flew it in its early stages. Although a lengthy service career may please designers by being a vindication of their ideas, for the Top Gun generation, being assigned to fly an old plane is not exactly flattering. 30 years after the first flight of the prototype, the venerable Intruder was again flying into harm's way. On August 20, 1990, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and declared it part of Iraq. What followed was the largest deployment of United States forces since the Vietnam War. Anticipating a further push into the oil-rich countries of the Arabian Peninsula, vast armies were gathering on the northern tier of Saudi Arabia. For the US Navy, conflict in the Persian Gulf was nothing new. Throughout the long war between Iran and Iraq, US naval forces were deployed to provide safe passage for oil tankers. Therefore, at the beginning of Desert Shield, much of the US Navy was already poised to strike. As the January 15 deadline approached, most of the world waited in uncertainty. However, military leaders were fully aware of the strategy to be taken if Saddam did not withdraw from Kuwait. Massive and relentless airstrikes. For this policy of overwhelming the enemy with air power, the A6 Intruder was perfect. It carries a massive payload by any standard. It can carry more bombs than any other plane in the Navy. However, the Intruder does not have the luxury of operating from vast runways as do the large Air Force bombers, but it must always return to its home at sea. When January 15th arrived with no sign of capitulation on the part of the Iraqi Army, President George Bush wasted no time in making good on his promise. The order for airstrikes came at dawn, and for the A6E Intruder crews aboard the USS Roosevelt, the war began immediately. In the cockpit of attack jet Vulture 501, Lieutenant Pete Raznick and his bombardier navigator BN watched the morning sun paint the horizon the picture of a deceptively peaceful day. Their systems were green across the board. Radar scopes showed no signs of active surface-to-air missile SAM sites or anti-aircraft artillery (DIA). The mission felt sterile, almost like a training sortie back in Nevada. "It just seems so benign," Raznik noted over the intercom, his voice calm as he maneuvered the heavily laden intruder towards the target coordinates. "Nothing out here." With the target designated a hardened command bunker, the BN initiated the attack sequence. "Bombs away," he confirmed as a pair of 500-pound GBU-12 Paveway 2 laser-guided bombs detached from the pylons. Raznik banged the aircraft hard, pulling off target while his eyes darted down to his left, tracking the munitions descent. A satisfying flash confirmed a direct hit. "Check on target," he reported. He rolled the wings level, his gaze shifting back to the right, and that's when the benign sky turned lethal. A brilliant white contrail erupted from the ground, streaking upwards at supersonic speed. The missile tore past their canopy close enough for Raznik to see the rocket motor burning. A jolt of ice-cold adrenaline shot through him. His heart seemed to freeze in his chest. Missiles in the air, he yelled to his BN, his hands instinctively tightening on the controls. He keyed the mic to warn his wingman, who was now flying ahead, but his mouth was instantly dry, the words catching in his throat. With a surge of will, he forced the transmission out. "Vulture 502, brake right, missiles in the air." Before his wingman could even ask for a bearing, the sky erupted. 3, then 4 more SAMs launched in a volley, their smoke trails creating a lethal web. Below, the ground that had been silent moments before was now alive with the angry strobing flashes of AAA. All hell had broken loose. Raznik's hands reacted on instinct, shoving the twin throttles forward to their firewalls, engaging the afterburners and pushing the intruder to its limits. He didn't dare pull them back until the radar warning receiver fell silent a full 100 miles from the target area. In the grip of adrenaline, time seemed to dilate. Despite the intruder screaming through the air at over 500 knots, it felt agonizingly slow, and he kept pushing the throttles forward as if he could force more speed from the straining engines. The flight back to the Roosevelt was shrouded in an hour of profound silence. As they were caught by the carrier's arresting gear, Raznik and his BN finally looked at each other. In the dim glow of the cockpit instruments, their faces were as white as ghosts. They had made it back, but the illusion of a simple war had been shattered in a terrifying hail of fire. Flying during the day was not the preferred mission of intruder crews. Unlike the high-flying B-52s, intruder pilots did most of their attack work at low levels, well within the range of Iraqi anti-aircraft artillery. Because of this obvious danger, the intruder does its best work at night. Not all the Navy's carriers were located in the Persian Gulf. Intruder pilots deployed from carriers in the Red Sea flew exhaustive night missions over Baghdad, which often lasted over 6 hours. Baghdad was a heavily fortified city, and the greatest security bestowed upon intruder crews was the protective cover of darkness. For the naval aviator, however, the war did not end over Baghdad. As most will attest, the most formidable challenge often came not from Iraqi guns, but from the long grueling return to a carrier that was itself a moving target in a vast ocean. The mission clock did not stop once an aircraft was feet wet clear of enemy territory. The first task was simply to find a home. After a grueling 6-hour mission profile, refuel bomb, refuel, the intruder crew returned to the carrier's designated recovery zone. It was now 0400 hours, the dead of night. Under the immense pressure of fatigue, the pilot was having a bad night. He brought the A6 down the glide slope, but the hook skipped the arresting wires. A bolter. He powered up, climbed away, and circled back into the landing pattern. He boltered again. And again. 7 times in total, the aircraft slammed onto the deck, the hook failing to catch each attempt, a fresh jolt of adrenaline and frustration. The situation turned critical. The dreaded amber glow of the low fuel warning light flickered to life in the cockpit. With their internal fuel state now bingo, they had no more attempts. An emergency tanker was launched, but as the weary pilot maneuvered the intruder behind the tanker, a cascade failure struck one of their generators went offline, plunging the cockpit into partial darkness and killing the exterior lights needed to illuminate the refueling drogue. Stress compounded. Now it was up to the bombardier navigator. Fumbling in the dark, he grabbed his flashlight, leaned forward, and aimed its weak beam out the canopy to illuminate the tanker's basket, a tiny swaying target in the blackness. The pilot, fighting exhaustion and now flying on partial instruments, had to delicately guide the refueling probe into the flashlight's unsteady circle of light. After 7 hours of non-stop stress, they just wanted to get the jet on the deck. When the hook finally caught with the violent jolt of a successful trap, the mission was over. The two men taxied to their spot, shut down the engines, and descended from the cockpit. They didn't speak. In the silent confines of their racks, the stress of the night lingered, a stark reminder that the danger didn't end when they left enemy airspace. It simply followed them home. Despite these harrowing individual challenges, the opening days of the war were by all strategic measures a resounding success. Morale was high. Live television broadcast a play-by-play of a seemingly one-sided conflict as smart bombs hit their targets with astonishing clinical precision. Then came the inevitable news that grounded the high-flying morale. A report filtered through the ready rooms: an A6 Intruder from an East Coast squadron had been shot down. The aviator knew the squadron. He knew the crews. The uncertainty was agonizing. Were they alive, captured? The answer came in an audio file released by the Iraqis. Through the static, he heard a voice being interrogated. He recognized it immediately. It was the bombardier navigator of the downed jet. The next day, the video surfaced. The BN looked terrible, his face a mask of exhaustion and pain, bearing the clear marks of a violent ejection and the unseen horrors of captivity. The aviator remembered the introductory series survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training, a sanitized glimpse into what a prisoner of war might endure. He realized his friend was living that reality and likely something far worse. In that moment, the sterile, pixelated war on the television screen shattered. It was no longer a game of technological dominance. It became brutally, terrifyingly personal. Fear of being shot down is paramount in the mind of any aviator flying into harm's way. But for the naval aviator, it is only one of two fundamental uncertainties. Their ever-moving airstrip in the middle of the ocean can be a more unforgiving target than any Iraqi bridge or Scud bunker. It was the ultimate irony. The world's most advanced laser-guided weapons were delivered by men who had to return home by executing a feat of raw skill with zero margin for error. The war in the Gulf was the first combat experience for most of the men who fly the A6 Intruder. However, combat is nothing new for the aircraft itself. A quarter century before the outbreak of the war in Iraq, naval pilots of an older generation were flying the Intruder over a dangerous land far from home. In June of 1965, the USS Independence was making its way around Cape Horn through the Indian Ocean and onto the unsettled seas of Southeast Asia. As the utmost extension of U.S. foreign policy, the carrier battle group was again en route to provide what diplomacy could not. All the information is on the board here. Of the several squadrons aboard the Independence VA-75, the Sunday Punchers held a unique distinction. They were the first squadron to fly the U.S. Navy's brand new state-of-the-art attack aircraft, the Grumman A6 Intruder. Most of the men in VA-75 had previous experience in older A4 Skyhawks and A3 Sky Warriors, so for them the new assignment was exciting. The Intruder was the most advanced aircraft aboard the ship. The heart of its electronics was the digital integrated attack and navigational equipment, more affectionately known as DIANE. The plane's sophisticated interior seems in contrast to an airframe that looks more like a tadpole than a naval attack plane, but the Intruder airframe was designed with a purpose: tremendous strength and weightlifting capability. This sturdy body, coupled with its sophisticated electronic guts, provides a devastating combination. And on July 1st, 1965, the USS Independence steered into the wind and the Intruder was put to the ultimate test. All Intruder attack missions in Vietnam involved many other support aircraft. The Grumman E-2 Hawkeye kept everyone aware of the presence of unwelcome MiGs. Any MiGs in the area became the responsibility of the mighty F-4 Phantom. The Intruder has absolutely no air defense capability, making it highly vulnerable to attack from an enemy aircraft. Therefore, an Intruder never flies into combat without fighters in the vicinity. Many unfortunate North Vietnamese pilots would soon realize the Phantom was deadly proficient in this role. So proficient that not one Intruder was ever lost to an enemy aircraft. For all naval aviators, crossing the beach is the most symbolic stage of any mission. They are the fullest extension of naval power, attacking always from the sea. Part pilot, part pirate, they come ashore, taking the land by storm, only to return to an unlikely sanctuary that is their home upon the sea. Even when a naval pilot finds his aircraft crippled, he will make every attempt to get back to the safety of the ocean, where he can be assured that his fellow sailors will pick him up only minutes after he hits the drink. As the Intruder hurtles toward the target, the pilot must already be considering the most important step of all, crossing back over the beach. Early Intruder missions were carried out against highways and bridges just south of Hanoi. It was clear from the beginning that North Vietnam was a dangerous place to fly. Well-entrenched anti-aircraft artillery was a constant threat, especially to the low-flying Intruders. To make matters worse, the Sunday punchers had to deal with a variety of other problems. The extremely hot temperatures and high humidity harmed the plane's electronics and radar reliability. This problem was aggravated by the inaccuracy of the early maps of Vietnam. Some of these early maps were as much as 3 to 4 miles in error. However, the most serious problem faced by Intruder crews in the early days of the Vietnam War was related to the separation of the bombs from the bomb racks. The mechanical bomb racks had a devastating tendency to ignite the bombs while still under the wing of the plane. This problem had to be fixed immediately and was resolved with the addition of bomb ejection systems built by the Douglas Company, but not before 3 Intruders were lost. Donald Becker, a rear admiral in the U.S. Navy, was forced to eject when a bomb exploded under his wing in July 1965. Like many Intruder pilots in Vietnam, he would not make it back over the beach. On one occasion, a Marine A-6 pilot was on a bombing mission over the Ho Chi Minh Trail when a surface-to-air missile crippled his plane. The bombardier navigator was killed, and the pilot was forced to eject into the inhospitable jungle below. North Vietnamese troops, aware that the pilot was present in the area, awaited the arrival of the rescue team in the hopes of striking an even greater blow to the Americans. The rescue force knew a bad situation when they saw one. Enemy troops had enveloped the pilot on 3 sides, and they needed him to travel east before he could be safely rescued. However, the problem was how to relay this message to the pilot without it being intercepted by North Vietnamese listening to the same radio frequency. Then one of the rescue pilots came up with an ingenious solution. He created a message that only a naval aviator could understand. The message stated, "We think you need a cat before we can give you your trap. The wind is in the first 3 of your SSN. Cyclic ops are now. Do you understand?" The message simply stated that the pilot needed to catapult to a new location before he could be trapped, meaning to be safely rescued. The first 3 digits of the downed pilot's social security number happened to be 090, which is due east, the direction the rescue forces wanted him to go. After 4 days in the jungle, the young Marine pilot was finally rescued. October in Vietnam marks the beginning of the monsoon season. It was during this period of blanket cloud cover and torrential downpours that the Intruder had its first chance to truly shine. Enemy troops, once given a reprieve from air attack when the monsoon rain set in, could now expect to be hit in the worst of all weather conditions. The bad weather capability of the A-6A came both from the strength of its airframe and the power of its electronics. The digital navigational equipment gives the pilot and his bombardier navigator a clear view of the terrain on an onboard display screen deemed almost space age in 1965. On a sunny day, this display is almost redundant, but in bad weather, it gives the Intruder crew a powerful advantage. Deeply enshrouded in a thick layer of clouds, the Intruder is in its element. Hurtling headlong through the monsoon rains, the bombardier navigator fixes on a target that the two men will never see with their own eyes. The Intruder is not a very fast aircraft, and its inelegant airframe has given it the dubious distinction of being the ugliest plane in the Navy. But it is incredibly strong, and it is capable of withstanding a beating that would knock most other conventional military planes from the sky. The heart of the Intruder's strength comes from a box beam that is milled from a solid block of aluminum alloy. In a manner of construction, one would associate more with a house than an airplane. This solid beam passes from one wing through the fuselage to the other wing, and is what gives the plane its strength and ability to carry such a massive load of bombs. The effectiveness of the Intruder in all weather conditions pleased no one more than the Marines on the ground. In the past, bad weather had meant the absence of close air support. As the clouds moved in, the men on the ground could be certain of one thing: they were on their own. With the A6 now in the fleet, those days were over. The Marines could now expect full air cover anytime, any weather. The all-weather capability of the Intruder was no accident, but was rather the result of the lessons learned in an earlier conflict, the Korean War. The conflict in Korea saw the largest deployment of U.S. ground forces since World War II. From the Incheon landing and on throughout the entire war, troops on the ground depended on air cover to survive. For the U.S. Navy, Korea was the perfect tactical environment. It was a peninsula that could be enveloped by carrier task forces on three sides. The A-1 Sky Raider was the Navy's workhorse attack plane during the entire war. However, the volatile weather over Korea exposed a weakness that frustrated military planners. Aircraft could simply not operate effectively in bad weather, and in the winter of 1951, U.S. carriers often spent more of their time steering around snowstorms than they did launching planes. With these lessons learned, the Navy made clear its need for an all-weather attack plane. The Grumman Corporation, no stranger to naval aircraft, joined the host of other manufacturers in an intense design competition. In 1957, they built a full-scale mock-up of their prototype, and a year later they were given a $100 million production contract. The decade of the 60s brought with it a sense of limitless optimism in what America could achieve. There was no greater symbol of this than the Lockheed SR-71. This futuristic-looking aircraft was designed to take man higher and faster than ever before. In contrast to the sleek SR-71, the A6 Intruder is a study in practicality. It was not designed to break any speed records, nor could it attain breathtaking altitudes. With its bulbous nose and odd-looking fuselage, it was truly unglamorous. And in an era when America was reaching for the stars, the unassuming Intruder quietly entered squadron service. However, over the cloud-covered mountains of North Vietnam, the Intruder was anything but quiet. During the monsoon season of 1966, it flew 40% of all combat missions for the Navy. In the years after the end of the Vietnam War, U.S. foreign policy was directed to another part of the world, the Middle East. 4 years after the fall of Hanoi, an Islamic revolution swept Iran. Then the war in Lebanon erupted, and the disturbing rash of terrorism that followed demanded the attention of the U.S. Navy's 6th Fleet. On December 3, 1983, an F-14 Tomcat was taking pictures of suspected terrorist headquarters in Lebanon when a surface-to-air missile streaked past it. The F-14 knew that this was no ordinary SAM. It was a Soviet-built SA-7 heat-seeking variety that posed a threat to even the most sophisticated of aircraft. The presence of these missiles caused grave concern to the United States, and that night the Reagan administration issued a retaliatory strike order against terrorist strongholds in Lebanon. The strike would be handled by the aircraft carrier USS Kennedy to avoid involving any other country by using their airstrips. The aircraft chosen to carry out the attack was the A-6 Intruder, for reasons that have never been fully explained. The assault was ordered to take place in broad daylight, not an auspicious environment for the nocturnal intruder. What is even more bizarre, however, is that the attack was scheduled to begin at 7 a.m. Flying in from the west, the pilots would have the morning sun in their eyes, while the Syrian artillery gunners would have the sun at their backs. One of the intruders would never make it back to the ship. The plane was hit by a Soviet-built SAM while diving towards its target. The pilot was killed sometime after the ejection and the bombardier navigator taken as a hostage. None of the men involved in the attack had chosen to leave early in the morning. That decision had come from Washington, far from the familiar carrier decks of the 6th Fleet. Whether or not the attack on Lebanon would have been more successful had it been carried out at night is a matter of history. What is certain, however, is that all intruder crews undergo intensive training in mock night attack missions. For an aviator in training, these night missions can be a hair-raising experience. From the monsoon-drenched jungles of Vietnam to the sun-scorched sands of Iraq, the Grumman A6 Intruder carved its legacy not with elegance or speed, but with brute strength and an unwavering refusal to be grounded. Born from the hard lessons of the Korean War, where weather proved as formidable an enemy as any army, the Intruder was engineered for a singular, relentless purpose to strike anytime, anywhere. While sleeker, faster aircraft like the F-4 Phantom and SR-71 Blackbird captured the public's imagination, the unassuming tadpole-shaped Intruder became the backbone of naval air attack, a workhorse defined by its massive payload and the sophisticated DIANE system that allowed its crews to own the night. Both the history of the A6 and the history of the soldiers who flew it are inseparable from one another. Together with the aircraft, these naval aviators, who were a combination of pilot and pirate, pushed themselves to the very edge of their capabilities. They were forced to endure catastrophic mechanical failures while flying over hostile territory. They were subjected to lethal volleys of Soviet-made SAMs, and they returned not to the safety of a large airbase, but rather to the gut-wrenching, high-stakes challenge of landing on a moving carrier deck in the middle of the night. Every single mission was a demonstration of their expertise and determination. It was a high-wire act in which their existence rested just as much on avoiding enemy fire as it did on a refueling drogue that was illuminated by a flashlight. Decades after its initial flight, even though it was considered an old plane by a new generation, the venerable Intruder was once again called upon to fly into danger, demonstrating its enduring usefulness in the Persian Gulf. This was done in order to demonstrate where its value lies. As a result of a design philosophy that placed an emphasis on durability and the capacity to function in any weather condition, its service life is a monument to this philosophy. Despite the fact that it has been retired, the Intruder's legacy lives on not only in the annals of aviation history, but also in the personal memories of the pilots who faced death both from hostile action and from the inherent dangers of carrier missions. For them, the A6 was more than simply a plane. It was a safe haven in the midst of a storm, a terrible weapon in the darkness, and a representation of the tenacity that was necessary to project power from deep within the ocean. In spite of the fact that the Intruder's mission has been completed, its legend, which was created in the fires of battle and the harsh realities of naval aviation, continues to be an indelible part of the history of the United States military.